Thanks everyone for coming along today. Yeah, as Carl sort of said, it's an opportunity for me to really, I guess, have an opportunity to talk about the chapter in the book. And so I came up with this exciting title, and hopefully, it will sort of make itself explained as I go through here. So it's chapter 7 in the book, which is right in the middle of the pedagogic practice and the pedagogic enactments of using LCT to improve practices of critical reflection in higher education. So just there we go. All right. So the context for the work that I was doing is a pedagogic intervention in an Australian Education Diploma program, and I'll make that a lot clearer what that is as I go through. What I was doing here, I was working as an academic and English language specialist, and what that involved was me bringing a lot of my linguistic background and my experience as working with international students to addressing some of the challenges that we had in the different programs, and in specific was helping students improve their English language skills foregrounded. But again, I was engaging a lot with the types of knowledge that the different disciplines were working with. And so the particular focus of what I was doing in this particular project was trying to work closely with an academic who was delivering the course, and I was sort of in the background designing materials and one element of this intervention was me working on critical reflection and trying to make them visible in the course, but also thinking about not just making them visible, but making them teachable and learnable, because the materials I was designing, I was not delivering. I was handing them over to an academic who can be very time poor, and they often need extra time to be able to, or limited time to deliver the things. So part of the project, I was thinking about LCT, and I used it in two main ways. One of them was to actually get a better understanding of what the critical reflection actually looked like, and using that to sort of say, well, what are the practices and how can I make them visible? But I was also using LT as part of the design, because a lot of the pedagogic interventions that I would do would only work for 1 or 2 study periods or semesters or trimesters. And then after that, it would be handed over to the academic. So all of the teaching materials would come with going like a little booklet of here's how to teach them as well. So I had to think about how I would embed LCT in there too. So big picture, critical reflection in initial teacher education. So a lot of the literature talks about how this is really crucial for the preparation of all the novice teachers. And there's a lot of talk about the reflective practitioner and how critical reflection would enable them to metamorphosize from this from one being into this new reflective practitioner, and that is what often is identified as making a successful professional educator. In the literature, it's identified as you've got to relate your theory with your personal beliefs and your different experiences. But there's a lot of research that also shows that not a lot of pre-service teachers actually get these higher levels of reflection that are desired. It's also been identified that, through work with LCT, that it's often treated as a perception rather than an actual practice. So the way that people sort of see it, the way that people talk about it, the way that they think about it, rather than actually what we're actually doing in it and what it might look like and how you do it and when you do it and what it looks like. And so very often what we find, or what I've found in my experience, is that reflective writing, these critical reflection practices are quite prevalent across a range of different disciplines, but very often students are just kind of left to develop their own understanding of what it is, and also how to actually produce this as well. And so I drew on the work that I'd been using. So went for my LCT toolkit, and I thought, hey, here's a perfect example of how LCT and semantic gravity in particular might be really, really useful for this intervention. And so weaker SG. So
Is it just me, or is Daniel really quiet suddenly?
Yeah, it's
let
just
me
gone
see.
quiet.
Daniel, you just went
Yeah.
really quiet.
Okay, is that better now? Better now?
Yeah, your
Can you hear
sound
me?
just went just very, very soft. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll just make sure I talk louder.
Ah, well, there you go. We're back.
We're back. Okay. All
Mm.
right. Yeah, that's what I was saying before about the potential internet issues. Anyway, so weaker semantic gravity, the degree to which the meaning relates to its context. And so in this particular intervention, weaker XG was characterized by the educational theories and the concepts and the models that the
Oh,
students were,
Daniel,
yeah.
just to allow people's brains to take stuff in, can you just say the words like semantic gravity? Because like even I find it really hard to take into my brain listening to people say weaker SG, stronger SD. It's just
Sure.
too much. Just gives
Okay.
us just that moment to be able to just figure out what we're hearing.
hmm All
Thanks, mate.
right. So weaker semantic gravity in this particular intervention was characterized by the educational theories and the concepts and the models that the students were covering in their specific curriculum within the particular course. So they weren't usually expected to be going beyond what they were being taught in the course. And then we have the stronger semantic density. And so that was often characterized here by specific descriptions of the educational experiences that these guys had been having. So that could be prior experiences that they had as a student, or it could be part of the placements that the students went on as well as part of the course. And then there were also teaching observations, and then there were also materials and lesson plans that they were gathering through the nature of the course. So we can also talk about the semantic gravity changes over time and how it weakens. So drawing principles from specific cases, or it can strengthen. So move from the more abstract concepts down to very, very specific examples. So the other one that I found really important here was the notion of semantic profiles and semantic ranges. And so we can sort of map how the changes in the semantic gravity over time, and we can see the shifts. And so I found this really useful for thinking about the semantic range that was required by the students. And so I guess students at different stages of their education have different profiles, different entry points, different exit points, how much they needed to move between the two degrees or the relative strengths of these as well. And the students, they were in what's the Education Diploma. So it's the very, very kind of initial first stages of ITE. They're only just starting to learn about education as a practice and a discipline. And so they really only needed a relatively limited semantic range. And it was about making that explicit to them and helping them understand just what exactly was expected of them. So for the context of the study, we're talking about the pathways to becoming a teacher in Australia. Like lots of parts around the world, you're expected to go off and get a degree. In Australia, we've got a lot of extra additional qualifications to do with literacy levels, working with children's checks, and then going through placements and then applying for registration. So fairly standard practices. But to get into the degree, we've also got a lot of pathways programs. So in Australia, we've got a range of different pathways, and the place I was working at had 3 or 4 different offerings. So this kind of gives you a bit of an indication of the way that they work. It's based on the experience, the educational experience that you have, whether you finished high school or not, and also the English language proficiency levels as tested by IELTS or a range of different international language tests. So you can kind of see here that in Australia, year 11 and year 12 would be the final degree where you do all of your final exams and you get the mark that would allow you to enter university. And so you have foundation and diploma. So foundation is often you didn't quite finish high school, and so you'll need to go in and do a foundation year, which is usually 1 year. And once you successfully complete that, you can go into your first year of the undergraduate degree. The diploma is a little bit different. This might be students who did finish year 12, or maybe they're looking in a particular discipline. And so depending on where they enter, if they finish year 12, they go into what's called Diploma Part 2. And there they'd be able to choose either arts, business, or science. And the ones that I were doing was actually a double degree. And that meant that they were doing education as well as arts, business, and science. And the successful completion of this diploma allowed them to enter into the second year Monash degree. And basically what that meant was that in the diploma program, they were doing the core units of the first year of an education degree. And in my role, I was working on a content and language integrated learning project was the title of it. And there were two people. So I was reporting to the academic language and literacy manager, and my role was a language specialist. And we were working with arts, business, engineering, science, education, a whole lot of different projects. And we were working in very close collaboration with content teachers, trying to scaffold the literacy skills, the language that was needed, and developing teaching and learning materials for them so that they could go off and deliver them and integrate them in. So there was a lot of project management. We had to do a lot of needs identification, full analysis of all of the curriculum materials, the assessment materials, negotiating with the observations and working out where the best kind of interventions might be placed, and then sort of negotiating how much time would be allocated to them as well. This one of the big important things about the success of this was we had sort of top-down legitimacy, which was really, really important. So we had the head of education saying, you need to be working with this language specialist. So that gave us a lot more legitimacy rather than us kind of running around saying, hi, can you please work with us, which is some of the other roles that I've had to do. So we kind of had the top-down element, but the success of the projects was always from the bottom up. So working with the teachers and getting that experience and trust. And then we built up the reputation, which just opened up doors for us across the institution. So the diplomas, the education, I was working with two core education units. The first one was called Understanding, Learning and Learners, and the second one was called Teaching for Learning. And so in my analysis, I'm looking at the assessment tasks. I really identified that there's a real emphasis on teaching theory, how this relates to very, very specific teaching and learning scenarios, and a range of different ones as well, from personal experiences to perhaps case studies, to perhaps their own experiences when they went off to do a placement. And so the critical reflection was clearly highly valued, but at no point was it explicitly taught. So that gave me a perfect opportunity to say, hey, this is something that I think can be really, really useful. And we found that actually making explicit what was happened or what was happening and what they needed to do was quite challenging for the teacher, and that became quite obvious when I was talking to the academic and the lecturer about this. What do you do? How do you teach it? And often, had challenges in being able to articulate exactly what they wanted. So this kind of gives you a bit of an idea of the breakdown of the units. So we would be over a period of 12 to 13 weeks, two assessments, which is quite nice and manageable, I think. So over the period of that, I would inject little workshops and sessions. And you can kind of get an idea here that they were related to a lot of the assessment and the scaffolding of the assessments that was required, but also some sort of more languagey focused things. So on those sort of academic integrity issues and notions of what's paraphrasing and summarizing, and these often appear as obvious in diploma programs, and particularly with international students. And so the first element and the way that I've kind of structured the chapter in the book is around these two main strands. So the first one is, how do I make the practices visible? How did I do this in the intervention? And so I thought about using it as analyzing the reflected practices and making visible what they were. And I used three things. So the first one was actually introducing the idea of the wave. And then two of the techniques that I did once that was introduced was looking at prompts and how they relate to models. And then also the idea of predicting the semantic structures that were expected in the assessment tasks. So first one, introducing the wave. So in the very, very first session that I ran, I had a handout. I had a reference to the video that I created. I think it was 2 years prior to that as well. So I previously created a video on reflective writing that drew explicitly on the semantic waves. And so I drew on that and I used that in the materials. And so I was saying to students, hey, here's what the notion of reflective writing is. You've got to select from the prompts that you're given, but you've got to be thinking about how this relates to your own experiences and how these connect to the theories that you've covered in the first couple of weeks of the course. So we call that, reflective thinking and reflective writing, kind of using these heuristics to kind of get an understanding and make it clear to them what it was.
Daniel, you have frozen. Unless he's got a very long pregnant pause. Daniel seems to have frozen for the moment. How's everybody doing?
I thought he was giving us time to think and read.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking to myself, Daniel, you need to slow down a little bit, but not most of this much. So I don't know if I can. Hopefully, he'll realize that uh, yes, he's gone, so he'll be back shortly, I'm assuming. This is some of the problems that we can have with technology. Daniel, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah. So, okay.
I was just saying it's good to have to go a little bit slower, perhaps, but not that slow because you suddenly froze for quite a few minutes. Do you want to share your slides again?
Sure. All right, we good?
There you go.
Okay. All right, so just kind of taking you through some of the snapshots of the video. And so in the video, we'll be talking about how you've got this idea of reflective writing. You'll see it in your assessment tasks. It will appear as the label of the assessments you need to do in your course. But what is it, and how do you do it? And so I'd often go through and say, okay, you have this idea of an experience, and as part of an experience, you would need to create a description, and the description would involve who, what, where, when, what did you do? But that's an element of the critical reflection, but it cannot be all of the reflection. And so in the top right, you kind of see description is represented as about a quarter of the reflection as well. And then I introduced the idea of very often you'd be asked to use a theory or a framework of some way. And that would often come directly from your course. Sometimes it might be given to you, or sometimes you would be able to select
Oh,
one.
Daniel,
Yeah.
sorry. Are you supposed to still be on introducing the wave?
Yep. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
talking about the images up in the top on the
Oh,
right
okay.
side of the
So Linda just left a
line.
message on the chat saying it's not on slide view mode. There you go.
There we are.
There
Okay,
you
so that
go.
makes it a little
Cool.
bit easy. And so once I'd introduced the description and the reflection using a theory element, I explicitly said, okay, you've got the theory at the top and the specific at the bottom, and you need to relate them. And I used a couple of examples. So one you might see there is Hall's classification of cultures, which is one of the theories that they were using on the course. And then I say you have to relate that to your experiences as an international student living in another country, or perhaps another holiday that you might have been on. Another example that I drew on was I thought, well, cooking. There are a lot of the people on the course were watching cooking shows. So I chose someone like Heston Blumenthal and said, he's often inspired by science and often speaks about the chemicals and the reactions and the way that he cooks. And then I compared it to someone like Jamie Oliver. And I sort of said Jamie Oliver's more like a homely kind of, he's not too science about it, but he's still, does his work. And then I threw in the image of someone burning and sort of said, this is my cooking or your cooking. So trying to get that concept across of moving from more abstract or less context dependent or more complex right down to your own experiences as well. And then a couple of images of surfers and how that might be mapped on the wave as well. So once they'd sort of had a little bit of a look at the video, they'd come into another session. And in the following session, we'd have a look at some of the task prompts that they had to do. So they were given a list of sometimes 8 or 9 different prompts. And I went through and I said, okay, I began to realize that there was one of the challenges that we were having there was this is the kind of thing that they were being given. So you can see here that effective learning only takes place on the condition that new knowledge has to be linked to the prior existing knowledge in a meaningful way. Describe one lecture or school lesson you were taught, and then there's like a list of 6 questions. That's all they were given. And then they were told to go off and write a 400 to 450 word reflective piece. And so I recognize that one of the big problems that the students are going to have is that they may just end up generating a list of answers to each of those questions. And so they would say, you know, what the subject was, what was taught in the lesson, what the activities were, whether they thought it was successful and why, how they felt about it, and then the implications that it had for themselves. But what wasn't explicit for them was that it was not just about their personal opinion or evaluation of the lesson. They actually wanted them to relate it to the educational theory that they'd been doing. So if this was in week 3, the assumption was that they would be connecting it to the theories that have been covered in weeks 1, 2, and 3. But that wasn't explicit.
Daniel,
So
it doesn't even say, like, all the helping questions are all like very strong semantic gravity too, aren't they? But even like the overarching question isn't even at the top. It's just like there's very implicit that there might be some theory about knowledge and learning.
Right. They're very kind of
That's
general.
interesting. Yeah.
So I picked the one that I thought was the hardest. Some of the other ones were worded, to be fair, they were worded better than this one, but I went with this one because I went, oh, this is something that's really quite obvious.
Daniel, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Did you, just going back to those prompts, because they're kind of fascinating, did you have any opportunity to connect with the lecturer about how those things came to be? Like what they were thinking when they created them?
So these particular questions are actually provided directly to the lecturer from the education faculty. So these were very likely the questions that they were doing in the first year of the education degree at the university. So myself and the lecturer had no real agency or power to do anything about it or to change it, perhaps beyond just feeding back to the university. We kind of just had to work with what we were given. And so I went away and I wrote an example model text, and then I went back to the lecturer and I let her have a look at it and sort of said, is this the sort of thing that you're looking for? And she said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for, something along those sorts of lines. So that kind of that was the first step. So I had the model text, and then I had to sort of think about, okay, what am I going to do with the model text? And a reminder that another part of this project was actually looking at the scaffolding of the genre and the language and how this was being, how the students had to draw on the language resources as well. So I kind of broke it down into its different stages and gave a very simple kind of indication to the students where I could do an activity in the class where you could almost, either cut it into strips or get them to be matching the parts. So online now, there's a lot of affordances where you can kind of break up a text and they might be able to match it up with its function. So I was pointing out things like the verb tense and how that might be indicative of a change in the stage. And then also talking about where does it kind of shift from what the lesson taught to what the reflections were and what was being included in there as well. All the while trying to kind of keep it fairly straightforward and simple for anyone who picked it up. So after they kind of had a little bit of a deconstruction of the text and the structure, then they would get something like this. So in the third exercise, they've looked at it and I've just asked them 3 simple questions. Does it describe personal experience? Yes. Does it have reference to educational theories? Yes. Are there connections between the theoretical concepts and the experience? And it would be yes. And then got the students, because they'd seen the wave, I said, okay, well, here's sort of like a bit of a profile of what we were seeing in the text. Have a look at it. You can kind of see that the different boxes relate to the different segments of the text. So kind of let them have a go at it and see what they put in there. So ideally what we were looking for was the first box at the bottom was about the lesson itself and what were the stages of the lesson in the first paragraph, and then you shift in the second paragraph and we'd start to look at 2 different theories. So the first one would be the ZBT and the second one would be constructivism. And at that point I was kind of able to point out, hey, this is where you get your referencing. Okay, so your referencing is often indicative of your understanding that it's a theory that's come from the materials. Didn't labor that too much, but just pointed it out to them by saying, if you're not including these references or these specific language, then perhaps you're not actually doing what's expected of you. And then at the very, very end, there would be trying to bring the two together in a certain way. So trying to relate these particular theories through.
And that's the profile of your model, is it?
Yes, very, very rough, but yes.
So you do like two theories instantly, one after another.
Yep.
Is that because there's just not enough space to do like incident, one theory, theory, incident, do them separately?
Yeah, I think what it was the ambiguity of what was expected. I think they wanted them to show reference to a number or as much as they could over the first couple of weeks. And so showing two showed that you recognize that there are a number of theories and you chose perhaps the ones that were the most relevant. And then I guess the profile is to kind of like say that they're separate, they're two different theories and they're trying to connect them. So yeah.
I'm asking because it just goes against all my instincts to shove two theories together next to each other in the middle of an essay.
I need to take the score.
And hang on. And rather than do theory, example, or the other way around, example, theory, it kind of like my gut feeling is always to kind of do one thing at a time. Would that have been thought of as being okay, or was there just not enough space in this? How long was there a limit of how long they had?
450 words maximum.
So bugger all then, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so they kind of like had to throw a couple of things in to the mix and then deal with it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's right.
If I may, also, ZPD and constructivism are so closely linked. Is it really two theories? I'd almost say it's kind of like maybe one longer box, right? Perhaps, it's kind of an idea with these two subsets that are explaining the idea that then justifies the pedagogical suggestion at the end, I think.
Definitely. I think the rationale when I was putting it together was that idea of the references as well. So I was sort of saying, because you had to emphasize to the students, hey, these are the practices that you're expected as well. So again, not perfect text by any means.
I've just got to say, I've discussed this with AV in the past, for example, is that sometimes when you're doing things like profiles, when you're working with people or working with teachers or working with students, and the strengths and weaknesses of anything particular or the exact shape of a profile doesn't really matter so much as long as they kind of are able to you're able to give them the tools to empower them to do something. So that like the accuracy, I think Daniel's right, but the accuracy of, I think also so Daniel Portman's right, technically. So there's too many Daniels. Daniel Portman's point was right, technically. But in terms of like just making that rhetorical point, that kind of strategic point of saying you want to have a couple to show a number of theories, so you don't get done by a reader examiner who's doing this really quickly. And I take mere seconds to read critical discussion posts from hundreds of students every week. And I will just be going dunk, looking for, if I was doing this as an examiner, I'd be going, look, reference. So I can see the point of having the kind of camel hump, double hump, double peaks there. Even if we were doing this as an analysis on the text, we might have one single one, because they're so close to each other. But I can see why you want to do that, so that the students are going, I need to go up to the top twice, even if it is actually more technically right. So there would be just one sort of like peak there because they're absolutely on top of each other in the model text. So I can see why. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is we always in LCT should use the full semantic range of the tools. They have incredible semantic range from the most technical analysis of individual words down to just doing this movement. And I think we need to take advantage of that to empower people. And if that means having to do it a bit kind of rough and ready, I think that's great. I mean, I don't want LCT ever to become too kind of, maniacal about technically right things. But that's not a critique, by the way, of what Daniel Portman said, because I think he's right to say that. And it gave me a chance to say this point, which I think is really important, which is as long as we're empowering teachers or students or whomever it might be, then accuracy becomes less important than the empowering aspect, which is what I think you're trying to do there, Daniel.
Yeah, I think I actually called it fuzziness in there. And so what?
I'm sorry. Just one more thing. Is there a pedagogical reason for not drawing attention to that first theory, just to kind of show, here we started at the theory. Can you mark, like a box to put?
No, there was no great rationale about that. I think it was sort of, as Carl's saying, trying to get them to understand that this particular question was not just a list of context-dependent answers, and that there was an expectation that they needed to address the theories that they'd covered. And again, kind of like when someone's potentially marking it, if you just have one, then perhaps they'll say, oh, you haven't fully engaged with the materials as much as we might like.
I'm sorry, I meant the sort of the departure point theory about, one of the conditions for effective learning is new knowledge, that sort of thing. That's not really considered like the theory they were supposed to be drawing on. Is that why there's no box for that? Or
Yeah, no, there was nothing. It was just sort of like a loose concept. There was nothing explicit about that particular terminology there, or not that I picked up on.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
And so what the ways we're doing here was showing the students that, hey, the task prompt and the text that you produce, they need to be connected. There's got to be a relation between the two. I think that's sometimes lost on students and particularly international students. They don't quite understand what that is. It also helped them to identify exactly what types of knowledge are expected, so that context dependent and that in context independent sort of meanings. And it kind of gives them a bit of an indication of when, where, and how the text will wave between the theories and the examples. So not easy to do in 400 to 450 words for a student. And it really made clear to them that the successful tasks, the ones that were going to be valued and to get the marks required, the theories and the sources that you'd been covered in the course up until that point. So reflecting on it now, it's interesting with all the talk about AI and ChatGPT, how perhaps ChatGPT will not do this. It won't pick up on the specific theories or something that are related to the course that's being covered. Well, I'll just often go to a much broader, wider body of knowledge. So the next one that I did for another assessment was the idea of predicting the semantic structures. And so as I was looking at these tasks and thinking about how the text would progress, it struck me that I could use the wave to talk about how you could predict the structure of your assessment and how sometimes the way in which the prompt was written offered different entry and exit points. So perhaps, as Daniel was just saying, was that particular one a theory itself, or is it more kind of general as well? And that became visible as you'd look across 8 or 9 different prompts. And so it maybe recognized that depending on the way that they're ordered, it can suggest a wave for them as well. So if we were to look at, for example, is question 1, is that a more context dependent, talk about your experience, or is it more let's start by talking about the theory, and then what happened when you looked at question 2, where did it go? And so you might get the different profiles that might be happening purely predicted by just looking at the prompt itself. And I thought that's a really useful point that might be really useful for the students. And so the materials that I generated was here looking at the second assessment, and they had 4 questions across here. And then again, it was something like, in this reflective essay, you will 1, describe your personal learning episode in this course. Whatever personal learning episode kind of means, it's left open. And then the second one, discuss where you define and explain learning and what factors you believe affect learning. So again, kind of vague and open. 3, relate the learning factor, so the one that you introduced, to your personal learning experiences and how you understand yourself as a learner. And then finally, reflect on and assess your learning journey, what you now come to understand and what it means to you as a pre-service teacher. So kind of you sense that there's something happening there, but it's really sort of difficult to pin down. What are they actually looking for? Again, there's a lot of your. So a student again might go through and just think, oh yeah, I'll just talk about how I define it, etc. as well. So the way that I did that was I did a deconstruction of the prompt, and I went through and said, okay, let's look at the task description. We'll identify the key task words. So describe, discuss, relate, reflect, and assess. And then also the scope or the object of the verb as well. And I'd give them a chance to have a look at that and to spend a bit of time looking at the question, which is often something that's just not done enough. And students go off and think they know what they're doing and then produce something that is really not matching what's expected of them.
Daniel, can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Thanks. Is this assignment that you did for them, is that in addition to the time that they're spending in class with their lecturer, like separately, or was it worked into the actual module?
The assessment task, you mean?
The one that you're doing here, understanding assessment 2.
So this was something that was inserted into class time.
Okay, thanks.
So I was allocated around, I think for this one, I was given quite a bit of time because I'd in the previous ones, I spent about half an hour. And for this one, I spent quite a bit longer because there was a lot more in it. So the next activity that I did was, okay, let's just kind of review what you've covered each week. Very simple. Hey, what did you do in week 1? What did you do in week 2? Again, degree of fuzziness. We're not looking for great complexity here. Let's just generate a list. Let's start with that. This is only a starting point to help you identify which theories may be relevant. You will need to do more than just identify the theory. Okay, so trying to be explicit about what was expected of them. And then I went through each of them in turn. So this was looking at question number 3, where they were asked to relate the learning factor to their personal learning episode and unpack that a little bit, which basically said you need to be able to identify relevant theories from the course content. You need to clearly explain why and how this source is relevant. Remember, good reflective writing makes clear connections between theoretical concepts and experiences. So I went back to the wave, kind of put in this model diagram for them, and we spoke through it. We talked through it and said, okay, you start, you define the theory, you identify the source, and then you'd be thinking about the experience. You'd be talking about what were the significant salient elements of the learning experience and start thinking about how these relate or match to the theory or the elements of the theory you were talking about. I'd say to them things like, you don't need to describe all the theory or maybe not all the parts, just choose the ones that are most relevant that you can match most nicely with the experience. And then you draw them together, show how they connect them, show how they help you understand. And then again, you get this kind of like classic arbitrary connection of you must include at least 8 references, which is not uncommon. And so I would continue, and then I went on to the 4th activity, reflect on and assess your learning journeys. And again, I kind of put together a table which would help students think about what am I doing? What am I being asked to do? What might this mean? How can I unpack those questions a little bit more? So for example, where do you define learning? Unpack that a little bit. What is learning? How does it occur? How do you learn? Why do students learn as they do? And then thinking about, okay, what references may have helped you develop your understanding of this? How can they help you articulate and explain your understanding of this there? So spend a little bit of time with them, giving them opportunities to talk and share with each other and kind of having an opportunity for discussion as a class. And then kind of to wrap up the session and say, okay, now that we've got all of this understanding of what's required, we can go from planning to writing, and you have to produce it in a logical and coherent way. You could use headings and subheadings, and you can use the profile to help you visualize the flow. So sort of suggesting that the first question was quite context dependent. The second one was much more context independent. Question 3 was about trying to relate the two very explicitly. And then question 4 was more about what have you learned from this and how does it drive you? Where are you going to take this as well? And so that was the example of the profile and how that came directly from the prompt as well. So This was really useful. It showed them that there was a degree of fuzziness, like we weren't really sure exactly how high or exactly how low or how they were being connected. Gave them an indication of where to move, when to move and why, and also the likely entry and exit points for the assessment task. And it basically gave them a really explicit means of planning a response in a new way through a new lens, and yeah, thinking about how that matches the criteria. What do you select? How do you relate it? And how do you sequence it? So another key part of this was, okay, I've got these materials, I've been designing these materials, but how am I going to actually make this teachable and learnable for the people? So really, LCT in the project was not being taught. I didn't expect anyone to be learning LCT, so it was the influence, but it was not the content. It's outside the pedagogic space I was working in, and so I needed to transform it in some way that was more teachable and learnable. So tacit praxis to help me think about how can I embed it for the pedagogic practices. And so I went to the ideas of the recontextualization and picked up on the selection and the sequencing and the pacing as some useful principles to help me think about how to take the external theory into the internal practice. And so selection. So this is something that I think a lot of us have been working on, how to choose, what's the terminology that we use. So basically I wasn't going to be using semantic gravity as a term. So I had all these different ideas of, am I going to use a 2 card? Am I going to use a 3 card? What am I going to do? And I needed to keep it accessible for the people I was working at. So I ended up on a 2 card. A range of different choices that I had: abstraction, general theory, concretization, specific, what was I going to choose? And really what I decided, well, I just go with the video that I've done. I've got to be consistent for everyone so that all the materials all match. And so, yeah, theory and specific, and then waves, no real need to contextualize that. That was fairly straightforward. So that was the selection element of the terminology and how to embed it. Another part was the sequencing. So of 16 sessions, of which 7 of those sessions were specific to critical reflection, I had to think about what's the order that I'm going to be putting them in. And so I had to think about, well, how am I going to, build the knowledge, or how might it break, or how might it get lost as it translates across? And so I used the waves here as a concept to help me think about how do I sequence things as the designer, but I also wanted to think about as a framework for the teachers themselves. So when they walked into the classroom, what were they doing? How could they do it as well? So that was a useful distinction I found. And so within the session, I found this really, I was reading one of Sharon's papers, and I went, oh, she was using it for working with students. And I know that other people here have done similar things. I went, that works really, really well. And so I used it as a guiding tool, and I said, oh, what's happening in the first lesson? So in the first lesson, it started with, hey, here's the purpose of reflective writing. Let's have a little bit of a, did you watch the video? Let's talk a little bit about the video. And then we would go off and have a look at the specific task. Okay, and so relative to each other, the task analysis was more context dependent than the video. So we could say that there was a higher entry point of the lesson. And then we kind of had these waves as we were moving through. So it sort of went from task analysis, what's happening in this specific task, and we'd weaken the semantic gravity a little bit so that we'd talk a little bit more generally about the other types of tasks that you might choose from and how they might be similar or different. And then we'd go off and we go, okay, now let's look at the specific model text that answered that particular task. We'd do the analysis of that. We'd go through and do all of the activities that I showed you before. And then we would use the semantic wave to analyze the structure, and then kind of finish by saying, this is something that you can use when you're looking at the different assessments, because the students would have to choose which one they were doing, and we talk about how this might be useful for them for understanding what they needed to be doing. So there's kind of like this heuristic gravity wave that sort of says, hey, here's one way of starting a lesson. You can have a higher entry point, and then you drop down into the specifics and you wave as you go through your lesson. Gives you a bit of an idea of thinking about how to sequence your lesson. Second one that was quite prominent was where I had a much lower entry point. And so here would often start straight away with, okay, let's look at the task. And then we might sort of weaken the gravity by talking a little bit more generally about different types of task words, what they might mean. And then we would go back into the task at hand, look at the plan, talk about planning and note taking, and then weaken it again to say, okay, how can we use waves to select and organize what we're writing about? And then going back into the task at hand and saying, how can you draw on this to improve your planning as well? And I found that this profile became really common for starting with the test assessment tasks. So getting right in there and saying, this is what you're doing, this is why we're doing it, let's start there. But it was also really useful for thinking about across the sessions. So I had 7 sessions as it went along. And so it'd be a question of what's the range? So often in the first session, it would be a question of, oh, I can't do too much. Okay, softly, gently, don't go too abstract, don't go too context independent, keep it manageable. And then as we moved across in each of the sessions, we try and integrate a little bit more. So as part of the critical reflection practices that I've been talking about today, there was also the linguistic elements, there was also the paraphrasing elements, there were the APA reference elements. So trying to cover as many of these in a principled way as I could. And then thinking about how do I sequence these and how do they match the curricular structure, and really emphasizing the process as we went along as well. So, the students would often say they just want to write a draft and just hand it in, or, not really do any editing or any planning. So really taking the time to say, hey, no, let's spend the time to analyze the task. Let's spend the time to plan and talk about things. And then you go off and start putting together a draft, and then you polish your draft, etc. So really what we're trying to do here is to build that understanding of the complexities of what they're being asked to do. A 400-word text is actually really quite complex here. And there's not just the critical reflection practices of, selecting the right theory, choosing the right personal experience, but also expressing that through language. And so in the diplomas, there's a great emphasis on the language outcomes in addition to the course outcomes as well. So I would be integrating those as well, particularly as we got further along. So the higher wave in sessions 5, 6, and 7 would often integrate a lot more linguistic resources and the way that they were being used as well. And the other thing that I was thinking about was pacing. And so, they needed to actually get good at being able to reflect. They needed time to talk about what is this reflection? What does it mean? And time to talk with each other and reflect and share their ideas as well. And as I said previously, before the intervention, there was absolutely no time dedicated to this. And so through the intervention, I was able to create space and time and opportunities for the students and the lecturer, the academic, to sit down, to analyze, deconstruct, co-construct, talk about, look at models, talk about the assessments. And so, as I said before, 7 sessions across 2 units purely for critical reflection, plus another, another 9 for other activities as well. Of the 7, the first 3 sessions were about 30 to 40 minutes long for the first assessment. So we spent quite a lot of time in the preparation. The rationale behind that was to say, let's spend more time on the easier stuff at the beginning so they have a good understanding of the principles of what they're being asked to do. And then as they go through the course, they can start trying to deal with some of the other complexities as well. And so the 4 later sessions basically addressed each of the assessments in turn. As we got further along, I was given longer sessions. So sometimes it was up to 2 hours each of the session, which was really good. And I think it just reflected that the lecturer and the academic thought, hey, this is relevant, it's really functional, it really helps the students. So it kind of takes us to the evaluation. So I can't make any claims directly of the impact of the materials, but this is kind of the way that I can evidence. And really, you can. Shows that the students found them very useful to quite useful. They found the intervention very, very. That the unit benefited from it, and they found it useful, and some really nice quotes as well, talking about how they have a better understanding of how practices need to be grounded in theory and how what they were covering in the course influenced them as well. direct explicit references to the waves and how it gave them ideas or ways to be thinking about how to draft or hints for writing as well. And the quote at the bottom I also like as well is that I'm not still master at finding correct education theory and connecting, but it's evidence that they've got an understanding that that's what they need to be doing. And I thought that that's a nice indication that, hey, it's actually having an impact. So positive student feedback. The unit
That's
leader.
really great, by the way, because it's really good to see that people are finding it useful.
Yeah, it was very satisfying actually. But the unit leader as well was really glowing about it as well. And the fact that she was opened her classroom doors to me, allocated me time in an extremely busy curriculum, and to be offering, 1 to 2 hour sessions, very, very generous of her as well. She
I've
found the
never done
semantic.
anything like this, but I just remember it reminded me of an interdisciplinary unit at my university, which is loathed by students and empty of content, in which I did semantics. And because it's almost as if some students, we kind of throw these assessments and demands at them, and they kind of don't have much to go on. And you give them anything, any kind of structure or something that they can get their teeth into. And it's like, for some, it's like throwing them one of those rings, in the sea. They're kind of like sort of drowning or whatever, and you're sort of throwing them something to give them a chance to actually float and get their head above water, to have something to go, this is where I can start from. And it sounds like waves were semantic waves for that for these students.
Yeah, and that came out. I had a number of quotes there, explicitly talking about that as well, but also the unit leader talking about it as well, and the fact that she said, okay, this is actually useful. She taught in the education faculty, and she took the ideas there as well to work with their postgraduate students, and that was really really nice to hear too. And then the final, we also had the external moderators of the assessment tasks as well. And again, I just sort of picked out a few that were talking specifically about the teaching and the scaffolding of the skills, and just how obvious it was that the students were able to integrate, and also acknowledgement of how challenging it can be for international students writing about these things, in a foreign language, particularly at the very, very beginning of their teacher education as well. So some nice kind of feedback there that sort of made it, feel really, really satisfying. And so overall, my reflections of this were that LCT was just really good for the practical engagement with the specific problem that I had to teach. And the other things that I went, well, it's not just that, it's how important it is to have these collaborations and these synergy between the language and the content experts. I can't do it without them, and me working with them on an equal playing field where we have the respect of each other, and they can recognize what we're bringing to the table, is really, really important for the success. The importance of time and resources for these sorts of materials as well. So in my experience, a lot of institutions will say, hey, it's really important, this stuff's important, but no one wants to actually invest in these. So the number of projects, this was a pilot project that I was there for 10 months and then it got shut down. And then I went on to another one, same thing. So these just sort of emphasizing, hey, the time and the resources are really, really important here, and they have an impact. And the final point is that no definitive guide here, but just sharing the experience with everyone. Hopefully, beyond the LCT and people here today. I've drawn on a lot of the work by a lot of the people here today. And thank you to everyone here for their work as well, because it's really fed into the work that I'm doing. So thanks for coming along to my talk.
Thanks, Daniel. Anybody want to just jump in and ask anything, say anything?
I just have a little question, and I apologize if you said this earlier on, but was there any kind of marking rubric or marking criteria for these assignments?
Yes, there were rubrics and criteria, yes.
Yep. And did they involve sort of how the assignment was supposed to be organized, or did they involve any kind of linguistic kind of clues to the students to help them actually organize their writing?
I'm pretty sure there was something. It was a few years ago now.
Right.
I can't remember exactly the details of it. They were touching on it. So as I mentioned, a big part of the diplomas was that they had not just content outcomes, but also language outcomes as well. And so that related to the rubrics. I think at that stage, I wasn't as engaged with unpacking rubrics as part of my explanation of tasks, which has since changed. So I definitely integrate that quite a lot more in my work now. But I think at that stage, because I was working on a number of projects, time. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thanks.
Daniel, can I ask something as well?
Yes.
So you said you said that this was worked into the modules. Were the teachers of the modules there? So like the teacher educators, they were there as well while you were there. And
Yeah.
how much time did you spend introducing them to sort of semantic gravity and all the reflections that you've shown us here with, with sequencing and pacing and selection and all that stuff?
So a lot of the student-facing materials were designed as in unison with her. So before each of the sessions, she'd sit down with me for half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, and I'd take her through what I'm trying to teach. And the idea was that I kind of delivered it the first study period. The second study period, she delivered it, and I kind of observed, and then after that, I was out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so what happened was when I sort of handed it over, and on the second one, I would make explicit some of the thinking behind the way that things were done. So I think I showed her some of the profiles of kind of like start here with this, and then you can sort of move along with that. Didn't labor it too much with her.
That's kind of proper co-teaching that you guys are doing.
It was at the
Yeah.
time. So it kind of reflects Lucy's work there, where she kind of had that paper where you showed the collaboration and how you had that shifting of the responsibility as well. So this was a much less conceptualized piece of work from that, but a lot of parallels with that too.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Anyone else? I know we kind of have shortened the roundtable so that people can fit it in better into their busy working lives. But it just means that when we have a talk that could spark a lot of discussion, we have to sort of jump off it perhaps too soon. But you can get in touch with Daniel or discuss this on the email forum. I personally hope that we get a lot more kind of work like this. I know it depends upon universities actually supporting this kind of work, which they don't. They just kind of cut it as an easy and lazy way of cutting costs, but leaving students to just dangle in the wind on their own. But I really hope that we can get more work like this, because it's just so. Steve's written in the chat, it's inspiring, and it's great to see actual outcomes, and you can kind of feel. I don't know about anybody else, but you can kind of feel through those comments the sense of like relief and support felt by the students, who are often just kind of in this sort of limbo of not knowing how any of this stuff works. What are the rules of the game? So I hope more people are going to do this sort of work in the future, and not think it can't get published, because it can get published, and has been published and is being published. So don't ever think that doing this sort of stuff, even on your own work, cannot be published. They can. But people are writing in the chat, so I'll just jump in and say something before we lose a chance, because Daniel won't be able to see this chat, and this is quickly reading it right now. Oh, actually, he is, actually. Right, well, I better bring us to a close. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that. Really, I mean, that's great. I wish I gave my students that level of support, instead of just throwing them under the bus.